So the first thing you need to do when you're creating a press release is you need to create a message. You have to have a one-line sentence as to what it is that you're trying to publicize. That makes enormous clarity for what you're trying to write up. It makes enormous clarity for the rebels on the street doing outreach and for the spokespeople to actually speak to the media. It's a simple phrase or a slogan that is going to sum up your aim. It's what you're trying to say or highlight. It needs to be something that isn't smart and clever and witty. It needs to be something that is clear and clean and obvious. It needs to be something that you would say to somebody over the garden gate or to somebody at the bus stop. It's something that people will understand and remember very easily in one sentence. And for the media, that message needs to be new, because our same old subject is we want to prevent climate change, but that's something that they've heard before. So we constantly have to dream up new ways of making it an interesting action or an interesting approach. If you said it before, if you've done it before, it's not news and it won't be of interest. For local media, there always has to be a link about why this is relevant to your local area. And so similarly, you can take that, if it's British media, most British media will want it to be relevant to Britain. The message is more about somebody says, why are you doing this? And it's how you'd explain it to somebody at the bus stop. So in as few words as possible. And you need to pick out something that is very easy to understand. So the bit highlighted in light blue is what I'd call one of the messages, which is the last 25 climate COP meetings have achieved nothing. So that's saying, 25 years worth of meeting didn't achieve anything. So that's the message, the blue bit. Now, a message doesn't need sources. That's what your opinion is. It's what you're trying to highlight. But every single fact that backs up the message does need a source. So the sources that were given here were the 5 largest gas and oil companies in the world. That one with the little number next to it, 22. 22 refers to the 20-second link that they'd put on their document. If you click that, that says, that's where this information came from, the over 1 billion. And the second fact that backs up the message says oil and meat producing countries have been stopping real action. And again, you've got another link there. I've given a separate link to this one. I've actually said the BBC as a source for this one, simply because the more kind of mainstream the source is, the more kind of believable it will be to journalists who frankly don't have a lot of time to go off and do their own research. So if it says BBC, they'll think, oh, science and environment, but that's pretty well resourced. Barclays Bank makes huge profits by funding climate change. That's a good example of a message. Barclays Bank gives more loans to fossil fuel companies than any other European bank. And another message, protesters show an easy way for Barclays customers to swap bank. The media list is a really helpful document, whether you make it a Google document or a spreadsheet or however you work best, but just call it your media list. You've got one example here about, a local publication called The Advertiser. It's a free paper. It tells you, so we're reading all of the stuff on there. We need to create a great big list of all the possible things that are produced in your area, whether that is printed, broadcast TV, or broadcast radio. So, and also when I say broadcast, I mean some of them are nowadays they're online TV, radio, and printed as well. But never, it's very easy to think, oh, BBC, ITV, got it covered. But actually, never underestimate the power of the extremely local. So what may be very sensible to go on your media list is actually your parish magazine. It could be your community newsletter. The very, very local is actually often very, very powerful. And people think, oh, media, that means, getting it in the local paper. But the local paper is actually quite a narrow audience. And there are other audiences that are wider. This is a very local, it's an advertising mag, a free advertising mag that goes through everybody's doors. And the journalists who work there, when I say journalist, is probably one person who's paid peanuts, works his head off, and is desperate for some copy. As I say, the extremely local is really important. Create your own media list. So whether you create yourself a spreadsheet or however you do it on a document, try and get the title and the type of the media, their email address, their publication dates. That's useful because their publication date, if they're printed or if they're, that will relate to the deadline, the time of day or the day of the week or the time of the month you've got to get your information to them. A lot of them, it's going to take a bit more research, not now probably, to find out the target audience. Most organisations would be really happy if you ring them up to tell you what their target audience is. Very simple and straightforward. We'll get onto that in a minute. But leave space for development as well. You leave space to make this a working document, because in there you're going to need perhaps to write down the names of journalists you had good experiences with, journalists you had not so good experiences with, journalists that will print massive long quotes and up to 7 photographs, that kind of information. Quotes are bits that are most likely to get used in a press release. I would say that you write them, then you ask people who are prepared to voice them. They can then tweak them and okay them and get them into shape the way that they feel that they would speak. But asking people to write quotes, the chances they're going to write a quote in the right style and the chances that they're going to write a quote that's on message are fairly remote. If they are going to do that, you're going to have the same people giving quotes all the time. So that is my very strong suggestion. Now that is where the media introduction comes in. Name, job, age, area. That's how you describe the person who is giving the quote. So, how you write the quote, it needs to be spoken language. So it's not "we will be going," but it's "we'll be going." And it's not I feel utterly distraught. Some people may say I feel utterly distraught, but people are more likely to say I'm horrified. So spoken language, not written language. This is where you put in feelings, motivation, passions and opinions. This is where it's all about what motivates you to act. This is where you can have opinions. And we've got a couple of examples coming up. These are mega super long quotes here. And the reason I've done two is some of the outlets that we regularly send press releases to will quote really stupidly long quotes, and they'll print the whole thing. So I'll write some of the outlets, I'll write a really long quote for, and some of them I'll give them the shortened version. So give you a minute to read this. The bit that's highlighted in yellow, I would use as a longer quote for somebody who's on side. So some of the papers who are likely to print everything, I would give them the yellow bit and the non-yellow bit. But for the not on side papers, I would give them just the essential stuff. And who I'm choosing to give the quote to is significant. I'm saying here, we're not entirely white middle class. We're saying we're not all tree-hugging unemployed people. We actually have doctors. So I've chosen who is going to be one of my quotes quite carefully. And I also believe there's some research being done that says if the first quote is by a woman, they're more likely to be read. I don't know whether that's true or not, but, if in doubt, get a woman to voice your first quote if possible. Another example, and this one you can see I've chosen somebody who's a bit younger for the first quote and somebody who's a bit older for the second. The press really like to have a photograph of somebody who's given a quote, and then they can put the quote and they can name that person. We'll talk about images later. So, images are a great way of getting your message across. And this whole thing about, a picture paints 1,000 words is absolutely true. You can get your message across on a placard. You can get significant facts across on a placard or on a poster. Genuinely funny placards are always good as well. And the next picture, the next slide, and we've got the person in the middle holding the cardboard placard, has got a good fact on it as well. Now, the person in the middle, is Katie, and she had given a photograph, she had given a quote. So she's, we got this picture and we sent that picture and identified that Katie was the person holding this placard. If you take photographs of members of the public, you need to ask their permission, or you might get a photograph kind of over their shoulder. They might not need to go into they're a teacher, they're 25. They might just say, Jessica from Arnold spoke to. But get permission and give names where you can. The press love photographs of children, but you need to get permission from parents, and you need to type that, and I'll show you where you type that. You need to say permission to publish. That's very important. Photographs that you send, and we're going to get into timings as well a bit later, don't forget. Photographs that you send need to be titled with the name of the people. If you just send it as JPEG, blah, 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 whole long number, it's meaningless. You need to take time to retitle the photograph with the names of the people, which makes it much easier for the press to lift that photograph and, title it at the bottom. Otherwise, they're not going to cross-reference and work out who the heck Jessica and Katie are. If you have photographs that you're sending to the press, then keep those photographs off your social media until the press has had a chance to use them. Because you've got good photographs, they like to have exclusives. So don't, put your best photograph on everything. Send your best photograph to your best media outlet. And if they don't use it, more for them, then you can put it on your social media. Now, we send pictures to a Google Drive, and we put a link to the Google Drive on the press release. This means that the press release doesn't carry loads of photographs which might make the email too big to send to the journalists. But if you just send a link to a Google Drive or to a Pix.io, except I would say just if you're going local, go Google Drive. And that way you can keep uploading things. If you have video, which you can edit incredibly quickly, that too can go to the media. And again, that can go into a Google Drive. So the other bits of content that you need to look at, so have all this content in your head before you start writing your press release. The other bits of content you need to get together are the 5 WHI. Those are the things that most people talk about. There are two other incredibly important things that you must not forget as a climate activist to put in there. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes you need to put in a how. How are you going about doing this? And something which I have been banging on about ever since my days in the BBC is the involve. If you are an activist trying to produce material for the local media, the last thing you should do is fill up their airwaves, fill up their column inches with information that will be good for them without making sure it's good for us too. Because we want people to get involved. We want them to find out more. So never, ever forget your involve as well. So you need to organise your 5 W's, perhaps your H, and absolutely always your I for involve. 5 WHI. And the involve, we'll get onto that a bit later. You can use that. You can do that by images. You can do that in a variety of different ways. But never let them get away with just using you as column inches. We need to use them to try and get more people on board. So, and that's it could be come to an action, it could be go to a website, it could be attend a Zoom, it could be simply sign an email. We need to give people little places to start off, and then they will get better, they will get bigger, they will get more involved. Press releases are also quite often described as the reversed triangle. Now, that I've kind of described that a little bit already. The headline kind of tells you everything that you need to know. And as you go down the press release, there's essential information, which will be the main details of the article. That will probably be the answers to the 5 W's in that first essential information. It will then go on to important information, which will be expanding on the essential information, and it's probably involving the how are you going, why are you going about doing this? What is your message? What's the purpose of this? And then you need to get your less important information in as you go along, and so that it can be cut off at any point and still make sense. And try and get your involve in there. That needs to be in there. I try and stick it in fairly early on and at the bottom. Yet I also say never repeat yourself in a press release. But if they are going to literally cut off the bottom, I want them to cut it off. And the papers I know that will print the whole thing, they'll put it in twice. So that's good. So the bottom of the press release, we'll get onto the job of the press contact later. It's when you finish the bit that you want to be printed or broadcast or the information to go out there, you write ends, or some people put 3 hashes in a line. That means ends. And after that, we've got a whole lot of stuff that we put in as well. But the first thing that goes there is the press contact, the name of the press contact and the phone number. We'll get onto that person's job later. We're slowly getting close to a press release, and the first thing I want to talk about is the headline. Now, how a headline works is nothing like the headline that you'll see in the press. So when you read a headline in the paper, that's not what a headline of press release is all about. Far from it. A headline is very short and very informative. You try and get the whole story into one sentence. It's really important to put quite a lot of work into the headline, because it's the thing that will grab the attention of the journalist, which is, you've got minutes. Well, not even minutes, you've got moments to do that. So the headline that you're going to craft is both the title of your email, because these days you send press releases by email. It's the title of your email, and it's the heading at the top of the text in the body of the email. So it could be something like road closure for climate demonstration on Saturday, the 6th of November. That's a pretty good headline. You wouldn't read that in a newspaper, but that is a better headline because it says it's a road closure. Now, particularly local media, the things that really local media runs off are closures of roads, blockages, delays, wheelie bins and dog poo. In a lot of ways, you're trying to get all the information over in one go. And these are based on local actions that happened in my area. Wombles ask Newark Barclays to clean up investments in climate crisis. Climate activists hold tea party outside Nottingham Barclays. You can use the local media to engage with local politicians. If you are doing something, I mentioned earlier the incinerator. We've got an incinerator campaign going on in Nottinghamshire. It's a great way to engage local politicians because the politician cares what is written about them in the paper. So quite a good idea, this might not be relevant for some of your actions, might not be at all, but you can use it for local councillors, you can use it for your MP. If you quote your MP or your local politician in your press release, then you are kind of, and obviously you have to have a source for that quote, you can't just make it up, you have to give the source. And you then need to know in advance what their arguments are, and you need to counter those arguments in advance in the article. And that will then probably prompt the newspaper to go direct to the politician and get more, and then you can pick that up and you can respond to, so you've got an ongoing dialogue through a series of articles, or perhaps using the newspaper's letters page to actually engage in their bad justification of policy and to counter their arguments in the media. And again, that's something that local press like. They like to see local engagement, and politicians don't like to have things that don't make them look great without answering them. So you can play ping pong with them. You can also go very local with this. It could be, I'm talking about printed press here. You can also use phone-ins if there's something which is in the broadcast media. You can use phone-ins to respond to interviews from local politicians. And again, this is something that may not need a press release, and we'll be talking about when you might not need a press release as well. But you can engage politicians very, very locally to get stuff in very local press. Tips for writing a press release. When you write it, you should be able to chop a press release off at any point and still understand the whole story. So the whole story needs to be in the headline. And then a bit more, and then a bit more as you go on. You're expanding the information. It needs to be written in the third person. Don't use jargon. We say things like greenwashing. We say all kinds of things that your average person at the bus stop doesn't know what the heck we're talking about. Press releases are factual. And those facts need sources. Remember, sources? So going back to the message. The only place you see opinions should be in the quotes. And that's where we need opinions. And something that can be very difficult to do, the reading age of a press release is age 8 to 9. So it has to be written very simply. So you are talking about making things much, much more simplistic than the way that you'd normally write. I believe there are some websites that you can check your reading age. You can put a piece of text in and it'll tell you what the reading age is. So, but those are kind of tips as to how you write your press release. Don't worry if it's not perfect, because sending something is so much better than sending nothing. And so just go for it. You'll get better at doing it. It will be fine. Something is better than nothing. When do you send your press release? You probably want to put it the lunchtime before, unless, of course, it's a weekly newspaper or a weekly programme. But this is a case, who am I sending it to? But you might well want to get information in there ahead of the game and perhaps invite the public to come down and join you, talk to you. Breaking news is another thing you can do. That works very well with marches, to do both the day before and breaking. Works very well with marches that are going through town centres. You actually send photographs as it's happening. So breaking means as it's happening. And you need to have your Google Drive or your Dropbox set up so you can send your photographs, or perhaps send your email, as it's happening. And you can do it as a retrospective. You can do it after the action if it didn't cover you, and particularly if you've got good photographs. And so you can just fly through your press release, turn the whole thing into the past tense, and send it again as fast as you can after the action. Not a day after. It is as soon as the action is finished, you send it as a retrospective. Embargo is, I don't want you to publish this until this time on this day. Embargoed until 7 a.m. on Friday. And that's because you're expecting your lock-ons will be in place by 7 a.m. on Friday. At the top of the press release, you give the date and you say release. Release means immediate, most of the time immediate. Try not to embargo something unless you really trust your journalist. We've got one BBC journalist we trust explicitly. We can send embargoes to this person. As I say, don't embargo things you absolutely have to. You're better off doing breaking. And if you do know one journalist you can really trust, then you may choose to just ring them up and tell them. But bear in mind, before that, thing I said earlier is there's no such thing as this is off the record, no such thing. after you have successfully got what you wanted to happen in the press or in broadcast or whatever it is, you think you've done your job, you think, phew, fantastic, it's all over. No, it's not. An awful lot of newspapers now do online articles as well as a printed newspaper. And when you read an article, there'll be adverts all the way through it. And they check very carefully how many people have read that article. And that tells the advertisers how much money they have to pay the newspaper because how many people have looked at that advert. So they really like loads of people to read stuff, even if it's not printed, they want them to read it online. Now, the press contact might be you, it might be somebody who's given a quote, it could be anybody, it could be somebody who hasn't given a quote, but it needs to be somebody who's confident speaking to the press, whether that is written press or broadcast press. You have to speak, and the written press, they do shorthand these days, or some of them record, but most of them do shorthand still. That person who is the press contact must be available to answer their phone from the time that the press release has been sent out. Journalists do not wait. And if you don't have somebody available and they're trying to ring you, then you can lose out on getting a great deal more said that might land up in the article. Now, as I said, this is not about doing interviews, this training, but I am going to mention a few basics about speaking to journalists. Every single thing that is said to a journalist is quotable. Despite what you might see in the movies, there is no such thing as off the record. Tell stories, put people in your illustrations of your stories. That's the human interest side. And please feel free to get the press contact to tell their story. It's not egotistic. Your story is why you're the person being interviewed. And so tell your story, tell your feelings about why you're there and why you're doing it.